Victor Frankenstein is a 2015 movie starring James McAvoy and Daniel Radcliffe, and it's a rather underrated reimagining of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. One thing that caught my eye at the beginning of the movie was the title, and in this tutorial we're going to recreate it.
Sir, please, may I know your name?
Let's break it down to its component parts. The first main ingredient is the screen grab and digital zoom of James McAvoy. Taking inspiration from the movie and what James McAvoy is wearing, I decided to create my own version of Victor Frankenstein. The next ingredient is the typeface. Now they went for a kind of distressed look. I've just gone for a more plain serif look. The third and final ingredient is the leathery skin texture. And again, I built this up in AI, and as you can see, I've desaturated it. And then I've added my own flavour of an extra layer of skin, as well as a kind of vintage film look. One of my favourite sites for creating AI imagery is ideogram.com. It has a huge amount of flexibility and less restrictions than other sites like Adobe Firefly. So I initially generated a younger looking Victor Frankenstein. The image you get from Ideogram, although good quality, is still only 1300 pixels. So I then brought it into Runway ML and used their image resizing to upscale it to around about 6000 pixels. This in turn gave me more choices in terms of my ability to edit it in Photoshop. Once in Photoshop, I used the quick selection tool and generative fill to make changes to young Frankenstein's body. And the reason for this is because his hands were holding what looks like a partial top hat or something. So I needed to recreate effectively the whole of his outfit and what he was holding. And here's the completed image with the clothing change and a few other tweaks. Again, using the quick selection tool and generative fill, I replaced the button in his waistcoat. Replaced the neck area of the shirt. I also added a scar to his left cheekbone to imply that he'd recently been in maybe a duel of some type. Finally, I felt his head was a bit too big, so I made a quick selection, used the transform tool to just reduce the size of the head, and any gaps that were created, I then used generative fill to fill back in any detail in the background, which worked quite well.
It's alive!
Moving back over to Runway ML, I'm going to start a new session and drag in the image that we've created for our Victor Frankenstein. And then from there, I'm just going to give it a simple prompt in terms of man turns away from camera in slow motion. Let's generate it, see how it goes. I ran the generation twice and these are the two outputs that I got, which I'm pretty happy with. A feature of Ideogram is that if you struggle to create prompts, there's actually a thing called a magic prompt where using machine learning, it actually gives you a more descriptive prompt, and that's what generated this old textured leather effect. The only thing I needed to do with the leather image was upscale it again using Runway's upscaler, and then take some of the color out of it. It was a bit too saturated. So for that, you're just going to our color and effects, and there's one here called Faded 25. It works pretty well. And then I'm just going to increase the saturation a little bit, not much, but a little bit. And that's it now, ready to be our leather textured background. Okay, you can now drag in Victor Frankenstein himself, and I've got about 1 second and 2 frames worth of video generation to work with. And what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting to actually make a cut on the last frame, and then that way I can freeze that frame and then stretch out. Now that we've got our video element stretched out and sorted, we now need to do a little bit of cropping and blending in to make this work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into frame and fit, number 1 on the keyboard. If you're using keyboard shortcuts, I'm going to go to crop, bring it in at the left, bring it down from the top a little bit. Don't mind if it starts to encroach on his top hat. Up from the bottom, and then in from the right. Try and keep the right and the left roughly balanced. It doesn't need to be perfect, but somewhere around about there. And then what we want to do is we want to increase our corner radius, and then the edge softness is the key, because that's like using feather in Photoshop. Just have that blending in. And we want it so the hat's just starting to disappear into the layer below. Blending wise, I'm probably going to want to reduce the opacity. 55 is looking pretty good. Yeah, quite like that. So let's take a look at it. Now I've done this in the first frame. It's probably actually the last frame that I'm going to apply it on. I'll copy the settings off that. Dump it on the last frame. And that means I can go back into the first frame and just reset it. So 100% on the opacity. And then we don't need our crop. Not for this part anyway. There we go, everything's reset. So it's going to go from full high-res Uncanny Valley AI generated into that. Now to get that jump going on that you can see in the Victor Frankenstein movie, we're going to add a Gaussian blur. I'm just going to take this down to about 8 frames. I want it to be quite quick. And then the other thing I want to do is within the freeze frame version, go to frame and fit, and then we go to our blurs. Now what we want is zoom blur. Now I'm going to go for a standard zoom, but I might shorten it down a little bit. So there's the zoom blur. Now we want to set this so that it starts off at 0, set a keyframe, and then we come in, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 frames. Increase the value, which I'm actually just going to make, I think 15, and then another 4 frames. And at this point, we bring it back down to 0, and that should be our jump effect. So we'll see how that looks. Back out, back to our AI video. Yeah, that kind of works. Is it too slow? Maybe a little bit too slow. Again, back into frame and fit. Go to our zoom. Just press and hold, and then you can move the frames a lot closer together. I'm just going to bring them both in. Let's see how that goes. Bit too jumpy. Move that to there. Move that to there. Try again. Yeah, it's got that kind of jump that we need. Let's see combined with the Gaussian blur. Yeah, that snaps in nicely. Yeah, we like that. Okay, so we've got our blend going on. Now, the only other thing that we can possibly do at this point is to really blend the two together and sell them. As we go back into our old cracked leather and reduce the contrast. See how they really start to sort of merge in together. Now it is looking a little bit faded at this point, but later on I'll apply a new adjustment layer, because we now have adjustment layers in LumaFusion, which is fantastic, over the whole effect. But for now I want everything to be less contrasty, and that way the blend works together. There we go. So that's looking good. And then how long you hold that for just comes down to the other elements being added in. We'll probably make it, say, 6 seconds and then trim off the back end. Let's get rid of that one frame. So there we go, snap, we're in. Again, as I said before, we'll add an adjustment layer later on, but I've got a few more elements to bring in, namely the typeface, and also my own twist on this is a sort of vintage film look, which we'll use as well. When it comes to creating titles, I tend to use Adobe Express rather than going into Photoshop, mainly because it's fast, it's easy, and it comes with a huge amount of assets which you can lean upon for creating all manner of title effects. It used to be called Spark Post, but they've since sort of amalgamated it with a few other apps and it's now called Adobe Express. If you're used to the likes of Canva, that's brilliant too. There's loads of apps out there that allow you to do this. And obviously, you can just do titles directly in LumaFusion if you want to. But for this particular part of the tutorial, I'm using Adobe Express to generate the Victor Frankenstein title, which is just a simple sans font that I liked, and it looks similar to the one in the movie. Okay, so I've just exported the title in Adobe Express. Gonna drag and drop it into our timeline, play it through, and you'll see just with the sort of flash and zoom, digital zoom effect, the title appears. Now my plan was to keep this quite clean and fresh compared to the distressed look of the title in the movie, but I kind of don't like it that way, so I ended up in Photoshop anyway. As you can see, there's our Adobe Express graphic, and what I've done is created a layer mask and then found a kind of rough and ready dry brush or stipple brush and used that with black as the foreground colour and basically chipped out or distressed little bits of the actual graphic itself, just to kind of roughen it up and give it that kind of worn look. And now that I've got a distressed version, what we can do is drag and drop it down onto our timeline and drag it to the front of the clean graphic, and that will bring it in, keep to the same duration just now, and you can now see the distressed effect, which if I zoom into, you'll see even more. So you can see it's not too distressed, but it kind of gives you the right kind of vibe that we're looking for. What we need to do next is move that into position. Still in frame and fit. All I'm going to do is just drag and the text down onto the jacket collar, the V of the text onto the jacket collar, just so it sits in nicely and kind of balances up, and it deliberately crosses over the book and then onto the actual leather itself. What I can then do is either lower the opacity, and that kind of works, or I can come in and change the blend mode to the likes of soft light, which might be a little bit too washed out, or overlay, which I kind of like as well, although it's a little bit on the strong side. So I think what we'll do is overlay and then reduce the opacity to about 85%. That just takes the edge off things, and then we'll just run it through again. That worked pretty well. Now the other thing that I'm going to do is, I think we'll keep this a 5-second title. So we'll get rid of these two elements. Just check it again. Now, it's kind of pretty much done at this point, but there's two things I want to do. One is add a sort of scratched film look overlay, just to give it a little bit more texture. And the second thing is to apply the adjustment layer. So let's do that. Okay, let's drag the old film look, which is a little bit of Storyblocks stock footage. And we can see that works quite well. So I could either have it plain vanilla and nothing going on with the image, and then the old film look going across it, or I can bring it right to the beginning so it starts off with the old film look, and that sort of ties the two things into place. Now another idea I've had before we go into the adjustment layer is I'm going to make a copy of the text graphic. Just Command D if you're doing that. You can see things have got a little bit brighter. I'm going to press 5 on the keyboard to go into Color and Effects, go over to Blurs, and then I just want a soft Gaussian blur. So we'll start off with 5. The 5's looking pretty good. 10's a bit intense. Go for 5. So what I've done is just giving it a kind of soft bloom effect. And just softened off those edges. And also has made it a little bit brighter. That's looking pretty good. And then finally, as promised, there's no keyboard shortcut for it yet, so down onto an adjustment clip. Comes in as a sort of 1 or 2 seconds, depends what you've got it set up as in your preferences. So we'll just drag it out to fit. And then from there, press 5 on the keyboard. And then I'm going to go in and choose original. Beef up the overall contrast. I want a little bit more saturation, a wee bit more vibrancy, I think so. And maybe go a little bit more into the yellow end of things, and then a little bit more red, just to kind of grade it and finish it off. Now it's already got a vignette going on. I'm just wondering if another vignette would possibly help it along. Maybe not quite as intense. So let's take it back and then decrease the radius. That looks pretty good. Yeah, I'm quite happy with that. There we go. There's our title, which we will switch the music on for now. And this is obviously the music from the movie, which I wanted to kind of keep. And this is where we're at. Okay, I forgot to add one last thing, which has changed a few of the layers around a little bit. What we've now got is an adjustment layer starting at around about a second in, and I have split my 2 video clips so that initially we've got the head turn and then we've got a zoom blur rather than a Gaussian blur. And what I've done is set the first frame and fit to 70% so that it fits in normally, and then the second video clip comes in at 100%, so it's cropped in, and I'm basically letting the zoom blur do the heavy lifting of the transform, and then you get that sort of double jump because of the original zoom that you applied. Underneath the head turning initial video clip, I've just got a plain black graphic, which I tend to keep in my photos. I've got black, I've got a chroma key green, I've got a pure white, and I've also got a sort of gradient that I use for some of my stuff. And if we just go back into here, I've placed it underneath just so that you've got black either side of the 16:9, because we're now sitting in a widescreen ratio. And then from there, it blurs in, and then I've got 2 cross dissolves combining our text and bringing them in. So the lower solid bit of text that's just got a blending mode on it, then the upper text which has got a blending mode on it but also the Gaussian blur, just so that it kind of gives a softer bloom effect. I'll switch that off and on. You can see the difference, and also sort of strengthens up the text just so the text will fade in nicely. So if you run it again, that works well. And I'm going to export this out, and now we can compare with the original. Don't forget to give the video a like and share. And if you would like to see a future series on movie titles and recreating them in LumaFusion or even CapCut, then leave a comment below and I will catch you on the next one. See you later.